Okay. Hi, guys. Hi, welcome. Thank you so much for coming. I'm Jess McDaniel from Connect Milton, and we're so happy to bring you Town Finances 101 tonight. I'm here to talk 30 seconds maybe about Connect Milton, and then we'll pass it off to the people who have the real information. But we have our fabulous website. I wanted to point out that we have an election info
pause you for 1 second.
page.
Sorry.
Sure.
Recording in progress.
Important.
I'm glad we're recording. Now we're recording. Hi, I'm Jess. I just wanted to point out that we have a really great election info page on our website. That's connectmilton.org. You can get all the candidates' websites are linked from there, and we have information on there. So check out connectmilton.org if you need sort of like a home base for election information. You also still have time to sponsor our spring 2025 Welcome to Milton bags. If you're a small business here in Milton and you were looking to reach into the new residents of our community, we bring welcome bags every spring and every fall to the residents who've just moved to town. And this year we've opened sponsorships for small businesses. So that's another thing you can find on our website. You can get your business card in there for $50. You can give them a promotional gift if you want to give us $150. So you can learn some more on our website, connectmilton.org. And we are taking sponsorships up until Tuesday. We're almost done with those sponsorships. So if you want to be included, go ahead and do that. Another one is, are you registered to vote? We want to make sure that everybody is registered to vote. You can vote. You can register until Friday, April 18th. And the office of the town clerk will remain open until 5 that night. And if you want to request an absentee ballot or a mail-in ballot, you need to do that every year. So even if you did it last year and you think, oh, I get my ballots in the mail. No, you need to do it every single year. So you need to do that before the 22nd, 5 days before the election. Okay, so that's it from me. I'm passing it off to you.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for coming. As Jess said, one of the goals of Connect Milton is to share information and resources to the community and to our residents, particularly around civic engagement. And this session on town finances came out of a Town Government 101 session that we held in January. And we wanted a way for residents to get more information about town budgets and finances and overrides, particularly since there is an override on the ballot this April. We're so happy to have Nick Milano, Amy Dexter, Johanna McCarthy, and Tom Caldwell, the first three from Town of Milton staff and chair of the warrant committee, with us tonight to present and talk to us about town finances and budgets. Just to give a quick overview of how we're going to run this tonight, in a minute, I'm going to let everybody present themselves and their titles. Nick is going to give us a presentation, and we'll have more discussion about sort of the roles and processes behind town finances and budgets from our guests. And then we'll have time for questions. So please feel free to jot down questions. There's index cards, I think, in the back, or you may have grabbed one on the way in, or you can ask questions either here in person or on Zoom. We'll be taking questions through Zoom also. And just to reiterate that our goals for this session is to really provide a fact-based overview of town budgeting processes and answer questions for residents. And we won't be going into any detail about particular budgets or justification for individual budgets. And when we get to the questions, if we can just keep them centered around the information that we're sharing this evening. Great, so I will turn it over to each of you to introduce yourselves, and then you can take it away, Nick.
Great, thank you. Nicholas Milano, Town Administrator.
Amy Dexter, Finance Director.
I'm Joanna McCarthy. I'm the Town Treasurer Collector.
Tom Caldwell, Chair of the Warrant Committee.
Thank you. So we'll go through a presentation that does kind of an overview of the town's budget, of municipal finances, Proposition 2.5. Plenty of time for questions, so we'll leave time for that. This is being recorded, so another benefit of this event is that it's not just about here and now, but also being able to get this up on YouTube. So for folks to watch it going forward, we have some people online. So for the folks who are online, you can submit questions in through the Q&A through Zoom, which we will see and be able to respond to if you have any. So I'll share my screen here and get going. And then I'll ask Amy, Joanna, and Tom to describe a little bit about their offices and duties as well before we wrap the presentation. All right. So we talked a bit about budget, but budget process, the town's revenues, town's expenses, Proposition 2.5, and what that means for cities and towns in Massachusetts, and obviously operating overrides that goes along with that. And then lastly, we've thrown on free cash as a big topic to get into in a little bit more detail. So just a high-level overview of what this process looks like. It really starts immediately upon the close of the prior fiscal year. So we begin with direction to town department heads in terms of what we are asking for them to prepare and submit as part of the annual budget process. We typically lay that out as what would it take to maintain your operations for another year at your current level of service in terms of same number of employees, same number of projects, same level of contracts. So what does it take to do that? And then tell us about what your needs are. What does your department need to invest further in Milton to expand your services, improve the service delivery, accomplish new projects that have been set on the back burner. After review with myself, the finance team, and department heads, we submit those budgets to the warrant committee. The bylaw right now says that those are submitted by December 1st. We meet that. And then the warrant committee commences their review with individual departments subsequently. I'll just note that the school department follows a similar internal process throughout. The school committee engages in conversations throughout this process. Ultimately, the warrant committee members take up that budget January, February timeframe, and then they're finalized in March. Right now, we're more finalized in April for a May town meeting, but we're getting that warrant done and out to the printer this week. So that's kind of the big timeline. Starts with a big picture direction to town department heads, gets into the weeds of those departments at a really granular level, and then gets back to the big picture in terms of what the budget can afford on a year-to-year basis. I'll just note that this process starts with a financial forecast in terms of what we expect revenues and expenses to look like. It's a rolling forecast that we maintain throughout the year. And it's something it's a living document. As we get better information throughout the year, we're able to revise projections and forecasts. So we had reported in June to the select board on June 10th, actually before the close of fiscal year 24, just a really high level forecast for this current fiscal year. So we are currently in fiscal year 2025. The budget that's upcoming is fiscal year 2026. So in June of last year, we told the select board that we anticipated needing a $4.5 to $5 million override, just based on a real high level forecast at that time. And the key assumptions at that time were that town departments would have a 3.5% increase, school departments would have a 4.5% increase, and health insurance would have level enrollment in terms of amount of folks on plans, and a 5% premium increase, which is in line with our historical norm. By December, when we're updating this information, sharing information as it changes, two key changes. Obviously, the school budget is a little bit higher at 9.5%. So missed that one. And then health insurance, we have increased enrollment. So there are more employees right now on our plans than there have been historically. In addition to that, the healthcare market for folks on private insurance or on a city or town plan, those costs are skyrocketing. There's been recent news announcements about Tufts and Harvard Pilgrim having layoffs because of significant losses. So there's a lot of pressure in the medical world. And we're actually right now budgeting a 14% premium increase for the plans that we offer to our own employees. And that is pretty much in the norm for other cities and towns right now. So, that financial forecast, we felt pretty confidently that an override was going to be needed for fiscal 26. As better information came about, we were able to more accurately refine where we expected those numbers to land. So that's, a key building block of our budget season is that financial forecast. In And just in terms of describing the town's budget, this is a really high overview of what that looks like. So in terms of revenue, and I'll talk about those a little bit more in detail in a moment, property taxes is by and large our biggest revenue source. $105 million levy expected in fiscal 26 without the override. Local receipts, I'll talk a little bit more about those. Those are locally collected taxes and fees. State aid, other funds is a smaller placeholder, and then free cash and one-time funds is also listed. In terms of our expenses, we have a capital budget. So our capital budget is shown right there. That's what we're spending for one-time investments in capital is $878,000. We've been between 800 and 1.2 million the last several years. It's imperative that we invest in those capital assets so that we don't fall too far behind and all of a sudden need to replace a bunch of frontline DPW vehicles, replace a couple of roofs all at once. So investing in our capital assets ensures that we're not facing significant swings in what those look like. Town departments are consolidated there at 34 million. School department is shown at 72.8 million. This is in the budget going forward, assuming the override is included. Blue Hills Regional is the Voc school that Milton is a part of. And then our shared costs is a much bigger bucket, which primarily consists of health insurance for employees, pension costs for our retirement system, post-employment benefits, which is primarily retiree health insurance benefits, our insurance for our buildings, all combines into that shared cost. So that's just a big overview of what our categories are. We'll talk a little bit more specifically about the revenue now. So we just talked about revenue sources. So property tax is about 77% of our anticipated revenues in fiscal 26. State aid is 12%, local receipts at 7%, and then the other funds are slightly less than that. So property taxes. What are our limitations there? So the tax levy, which is the total amount of property taxes that we can levy on all property owners in Milton, may increase by 2.5%. This is attributable to law referred to as Proposition 2.5, which allows that levy to increase year over year by 2.5%, plus new growth. And I have a slide about new growth, so I'll talk about that in a bit, but that's essentially new construction, to just think of it that way. So every year, property taxes go up by the 2.5% allowable under law, plus new growth. There are other ways to increase that levy, as we are facing this April with the override. So an operating override is a permanent increase to that tax levy. It's a permanent raise on what we can levy on taxpayers to fund operating budgets, the school department budget, town departmental budgets. There's another way to increase the levy, which is a debt exclusion, which is for capital projects. So the building we're sitting in right now, the fire station next to us, those are funded through a debt exclusion, which is an increase to what we can levy on residents for a defined time period while we pay back the costs of debt service on these buildings. So we borrowed for 30 years for these projects, so we'll be increasing taxpayers' assessment for 30 years for these projects. It's a little more complicated than that because of a special act that Milton passed. I won't get into that, but primarily two ways to increase taxes. One is permanently with an override, and the other is temporarily for the life of debt service for investments in large capital projects. So at the end of the day, these limitations on property tax and the other revenue sources that we'll get into put us in a position where our costs regularly outpace our revenue resources, which leaves us in a structural financial deficit to wrestle with on a year-over-year basis. Just a little bit more informational background in terms of the property taxes. So in the total tax levy, which is that $105 million number I referred to before, 93% of that falls on residential taxpayers. 7% of that levy is on commercial, industrial, and personal property. In Milton, as you know, our commercial and industrial values are very, very low. The use is very low. So it's really personal property that contributes significantly to that, and that's largely the utility companies for their wires and conduits and everything. We're able to tax those, and those are significant factors in our budget. In terms of residential value, so this is a breakdown showing fiscal 25 values. Of the residential value, 86% of that residential value is from single family homes. Two families are 4%, and then all other residential properties are 10%. So by and large, our property tax as everyone knows, is on the residents. And on top of that, primarily it's on single family properties. This is a history showing that average single family tax bill. So it's a metric that we use to compare ourselves to other communities. The average single family in Milton right now is valued at just over $1 million. This tax bill increases, as you can see, not just by the 2.5%, but by 2.5% plus new growth, and changes as values change over time. So since 2019, that average single family tax bill has increased between 3 and 3.5% year over year. So typically what we tell folks to expect is about a 3.5% increase in your tax bill. The numbers in red in the chart and the orange bar graph are years where they were operating overrides. So 2007, 2010, and 2018 were the last 3 overrides. As you can see, they're outliers compared to that historical trend on the single family tax bill. I mentioned new growth. So new growth is what we're allowed to capture in terms of additional value in town and tax. New growth in terms of new construction, additions and renovations to homes and are primarily where we get that. There's a significant amount of commercial new growth, as you can see in through here, but read into that, it's mostly personal property. It's not often new commercial entities opening, just with the economic landscape that Milton has. The last few years, as you can see, we've been close to or over $1.2 million in new growth. That's a significant deviation from where we've been historically. There have been several new projects coming online in recent years. There's really 3 factors. After and during COVID, people were investing in their properties, and there was an addition and renovation boom that really hasn't slowed down. So communities across Massachusetts are seeing that new growth through improvements that folks are making to their homes. In addition, in Milton, we've had several new projects built out. 131 Elliott Street, which is down right at the Central Ave station. Walcott Woods out on Canton Ave, which is a 55 plus neighborhood. There's been a couple of smaller subdivisions that have been included, Pine Gardens and off of Pleasant Street. 440 Granite Ave, which is a new building over in East Milton. The Ice House project, which is a 40B project on the Blue Hills Parkway. These are starting to contribute to our new growth value. And if you've driven around town and you're starting to see some of the 40Bs being built out, that gives us some certainty that that new growth will continue to be higher than normal for a couple of years. So it's important to just keep in mind in terms of what our options are around property taxes. You know, policy decisions around growth provide opportunities for new revenue, or decisions not to grow can impact our revenue choices. So I just wanted to put those out there. And as the 40Bs come through, we expect to see this new growth value to continue to stay higher than we expect. Obviously, if there's less investment in people's own homes, some of that base new growth that we're seeing every year from just additions and renovations might change. If contractors aren't buying homes and tearing them down and rebuilding them because the economy isn't as strong, that could have a depressing impact on new growth. State aid. So broadly, state aid is our second biggest revenue source, $18.3 million anticipated in fiscal 26. This is driven primarily by Chapter 70 education aid, which is an extremely complicated formula that the state uses to distribute aid to cities and towns around Massachusetts for education purposes. We also received unrestricted general government aid. That typically increases with the rate of the general state budget. So right now it's about 2.2%. State-owned land, there is a lot of state-owned land in Milton. It is a place where we get a decent amount of state aid. So any investment that the state makes broadly in payments to cities and towns for state-owned land translates to increases here in Milton. By the flip side, we also are charged by the state for various services, our county government, MBTA assessment, and then retired teachers. So teachers, when they're in Milton working, they're part of our health insurance budget. When teachers retire, they go into retired teachers' health insurance system. And so we're not paying that directly, but we get charged it through the assessment. That's 40% of our assessments. This is a place where Milton has seen some benefit in recent years. A few years ago, the state changed its Chapter 70 formula and it pushed more money into state aid. So we have seen jumps in state aid that not every city and town in Massachusetts have seen. The last 2 years, however, fiscal 26 and fiscal 25, we've kind of reached the end of how that new funding formula is affecting Milton. And we're seeing much smaller increases. They call it minimum aid increase, which means that every year the state will say, okay, every city and town is going to get $30 more per student than they got last year. They're called minimum aid communities, and that's where we are now. Whereas if you look back in 2023 and then back again to 18 and 19, where we saw these big infusions of state money and the Chapter 70 program changing, this has been a benefit to us. Most communities will tell you a story about how state aid is a lesser percentage of their budget. Milton has been more fortunate where that's not the case. We're really more treading water than anything rather than losing revenue in terms against our budget. This is just showing Chapter 70 more directly. And then our government aid, as I mentioned, this increases at a couple of percent a year generally, and it's about $3.5 million, closer to $4 million now. Local receipts are another revenue source at $10 million. So these are generated locally from other taxes and fees. Motor vehicle excise comes to the town. Other regulatory fees and license and permits in terms of building permit fees. Again, so just as with new growth, we get to tax those. When big projects come online, we're getting big building permit fees from that. Trash fees to offset our solid waste program. We do get some payments in lieu of taxes from a few property owners here in town, other departmental revenue, and then interest income comprises a bigger share of local receipts. So these are all paid into our general fund as revenues to be used to offset the general budget. We hear a lot about free cash and the use of one-time monies in the budget, so I just wanted to kind of give a little bit more context to what free cash means. So it's the easiest way to think about it is, what did we bring in additional revenue and what did we not spend in budget appropriations? So if the police department doesn't spend its full budget, they save $100,000 because they had a vacancy. At the end of the year, that $100,000 closes out to what we call free cash. If in a good economic season, we're seeing a lot of building permits pulled, we estimated $1.5 million in building permit revenue and we brought in $1.6 million. That $100,000 will close out to free cash, assuming all of our other revenue targets are met. So it's excess revenue plus savings and appropriations that budgets didn't spend. And then, obviously we're subtracting other outstanding liabilities that may exist. So it's all your money left over at the end of the year, the money you didn't spend and the extra money you made. For the free cash that we have to work with right now was certified at the end of fiscal year 2024 that ended in June 30 of 2024, was $4.56 million. And as I just mentioned, a large portion of that was revenues in excess of budget estimates at $2.2 million. Driven by interest income and building permits. And then expenditure turnbacks where some departments didn't spend their entire appropriation due to turnover, vacancies, not needing some of their general expense monies, so they didn't spend it, which we encourage them to do. And health insurance, we didn't have as many people and the costs weren't as high as expected last year. So $1.8 million in savings, $2.2 million in excess revenue. So that is available. What's important to keep in mind about free cash is it is a one-time source. If we were to say, great, we have $4.5 million, let's increase our budget by $4.5 million, who's to say that we'll have $4.5 million next year? And as you can see with our history, more likely than not, we won't have $4.5 million because we've never had that much free cash before. It's more likely to be in the $2 million range. One of the things I just want to mention about this is that revenues were higher than anticipated because in the wake of the COVID pandemic, cities and towns across Massachusetts reduced their revenue forecast because we weren't really sure what the economic landscape was going to look like. And slowly but surely, we increased our estimates in that time span, but revenues didn't drop as much as we anticipated. So on on the one hand, it was very conservative budgeting, which meant we had a surplus of free cash at the end of the day. But as we get back to more accurately budgeting for these amounts, we should expect that free cash totals to end. We've also had, for example, a couple of light winters where we didn't spend as much money on snow and ice. So we had savings in town departments where we didn't spend $1.2 million like we did in that crazy winter 10 years ago. This year, we had a much busier winter, a lot of Sunday, Monday storms where there were Sunday days, so where people are working double time. So these kind of year-on-year events might change what this money is available that we might have. So in terms of our revenues, like I was saying, property tax limited by Prop 2.5. State aid is limited by what the state is putting into the budget every year. The state economic forecast is looking worse right now because of uncertainty around federal funding. So I wouldn't expect big jumps in state aid in the next couple of years as we navigate kind of newer uncharted waters in terms of what federal government might do to support or not support initiatives in states like Massachusetts. Our local receipts it's $10 million in revenue a year, but we're not seeing significant hikes and swings in that. So overall, our revenues, as I've mentioned, are fairly limited and fairly consistent year over year. I mentioned briefly the fiscal 26 budget. So what is driving the budget increases in fiscal 26? And I mentioned health insurance being higher than anticipated. So we're looking at a 20% increase on our health insurance budget for a couple of reasons. The two of the main ones are that our enrollment is much higher than anticipated and than has been in the past. And we have that 14% premium increase. In addition, in fiscal 25, we were drawing down some of our one-time revenue sources that were available. And that meant, so as we're building the fiscal 26, any way that we reduced the fiscal 25 budget of one-time money had to go back into the budget initially. The school department, their budget going to town meeting is an 8.4% increase. The town department's is a 4.7% increase. So those are the big categories and what the changes we're seeing there. So I didn't get deep into expenditures, but I wanted to spend a little bit of time talking about the revenue side of things. And then I mentioned briefly Prop 2.5 already. So this was approved in voters in 1980, limits what kind of property tax revenue cities and towns can raise. We talked already about the tax levy. So that levy can increase by the 2.5% plus new growth. So this is just repeating some of the stuff I shared before. And then, as I was mentioning, the options for changing the tax levy, we have the operating override. Our last two were in fiscal 18 and fiscal 10. I explained about the debt exclusion. The other two options I just put on here for further background is a temporary increase for buying. Like we could buy a DPW truck for $300,000 and temporarily increase the tax levy with voter approval to just purchase it outright. Some communities can even lower their levy limit if they so choose. Hopkinton, which has experienced significant economic growth, so they've actually had underrides to reduce that levy limit. So Prop 2.5 has a number of things under them. The first two are more specific to Milton than the other two will ever be, most likely. But as I mentioned, the decisions and policy choices that we make as a town around land use and other items contributes to our Prop 2.5 limitations. And just in terms of how an override works, so it's really a two-step process. Town meeting and the voters have a say in an override. So in Milton this year, unlike in past years, but these sequences are allowed every which way. So the ballot question will be put forth first, followed by town meeting. So the ballot question is asking voters to allow the town to increase how much we may levy in property taxes. It's not a requirement that we should and shall levy these property taxes, but we're asking voters, can the town increase the levy that we assess to you by $9.5 million? If that is approved, then it's in the hands of town meeting whether or not to spend that additional levy. So the budget that goes to town meeting for the override anticipates spending that levy. But the town meeting could say, thanks, we're all set, we don't want to spend it. And the town will have the right to raise that through the tax levy, but is not required to. So both actions are required to both approve the levy increase in terms of how much taxes can be levied and spend that additional tax revenue. We have other resources available for additional information. There's a factual page on the town website. The school department has done something similar on their page. We have a property tax calculator available as well. The Department of Revenue, Division of Local Service, shares tons of information, including documents as well as videos. So if they're like 3-minute videos, some are a little bit shorter, that go into the nuts and bolts of municipal finance. And there's more here too. So I'll put this presentation up on our website tomorrow. So all these links will be clickable if folks want to look into that. So that's really what we have for our presentation in terms of, again, I just wanted to kind of give a baseline in terms of what the town's revenue and budget is limited by, what the expenses are looking like this year. Happy to get into further detail if there's more specific questions about that. But I think it would also be helpful for Amy, Joanne, and Tom to talk for a minute or two about what their offices are and what they do. So I'll turn it over to Amy first.
Hi, I'm Amy Dexter, Finance Director, Town Accountant. I supervise the accounting department. We're a staff of 4. We are responsible for vendor accounts payable, so paying all of the town's vendors, all of the financial reporting of the town, which involves budgeting, forecasting, reporting to the Department of Revenue, working closely with our external auditors. What else do I have here? And all the financial analysis as far as budget to actual, all of the balance sheet and expenditure reconciliations to make sure, cash is appropriately reconciled. And we have some involvement with payroll. We audit the payroll every 2 weeks, meaning we check the rates and any kind of changes that are coming through. And we work really very closely with all departments, town and school. We're there as a resource for department heads if they need help with anything, budgets, just, what's your budget looking like this year? Where's your spend compared to your appropriation, to make sure that they are staying within their appropriations. And another big one is capital and debt. We track all of the capital projects for all departments and work closely with Joanna's office when we're going out to the bond market and all of the financial reporting related to that.
It's very intimidating to use a microphone.
Well, it doesn't stretch that far.
Hi, everybody. So again, I'm Joanna McCarthy. I'm the treasurer collector. You may know that I was elected into this position 2 years ago, but I am now hired into this position. So I work for the town in an appointed role at this time. I was your last elected treasurer collector. So a little bit about the office. I also have a staff of 4 in the office, or 5 including myself. I'll start with the collecting side. So you might be familiar with some bills that you pay in town here. These range from tax bills, your residential real estate tax and commercial real estate tax, like Nick had highlighted. Also personal property taxes, and those happen 4 times a year. We also collect motor vehicle excise tax. This is the season that most folks receive their motor vehicle excise tax bills. We collect boat excise tax actually as well. And my office is also responsible for collecting utility bill payments, trash sticker payments, all of the fun relating to that. The way that works is the assessor's office. We have a partner department across the hall from us that assesses those taxes, right? They do the assessing, they send that over to us for billing and for collection. So that's a little bit about collection. So the treasury end of things is multi-pronged. I would say one of them is that we receive money from all other departments in town. So some examples of this are building permits from the inspectional services department, We get state and federal reimbursement for lots of different things from lots of different departments. We see that come into our accounts, and we receive those turnovers from other departments. We get dog license fees from the clerk's office. We collect school lunch money in my office, right? So all of the money that goes, for the second and third lunches that kids are buying at the high schools ends up in my office. Then we take all of that money from both the collections and the taxes and the other departmental turnovers, and we invest it. So from that standpoint, my mantra, or the mantra I learned when I got into this office, was safety first. Make sure those funds are safe and will not go down on us, will not get lost, right? Make sure they're liquid, that we can use that capital when we need it. And then make sure, thirdly, that we're earning a return on it. So I've been trying to do that in all buckets over the past couple of years. And we've been fortunate enough to make some money leveraging some of the rates in the marketplace, but also kind of working with Amy and her team on cash flow projections, like when we're going to need to pay bills, when we're going to need to make large debt payments. That's important in understanding when we need to pull money out of significantly higher interest bearing stuff. Let's see. So we hold most of our money in interest bearing savings accounts, CD products. We also have some trust fund money in some investment accounts that are very moderate to low risk accounts. And just to give you some perspective, as a snapshot at the end of the year, last fiscal year, so that would be June 30th, 2024, our cash balance, cash and investments, all in was about $68 million. So that's rolling for us, right? Obviously that's not money that's available and should be determined as free cash, but that's already built into the budget. So the other thing that the treasurer's office does is pay our bills. I think Amy mentioned that she works with accounts payable in her department. They process check payments and wire payments. We actually remit those. So we send all of that out to our vendors, and I think a really important thing that happens in my office is payroll. So we also send that money out to all of our town employees on a biweekly basis. And then I guess lastly, we borrow money. I shouldn't say lastly, but we do this frequently enough, but in significant chunks, right? So we issue debt when we're authorized to do so, or when I'm authorized to do so by town meeting. We will do so in the form of bonds or sometimes bond anticipation notes. There's both long-term and short-term debt. To give you a sense of kind of the amount of debt we have outstanding, we had about 32 million outstanding at the end of last year in long-term debt, with another 20 million in short-term debt outstanding. And then I think an important concept is we don't issue that debt and we don't borrow money until we need it. So oftentimes town meeting and will provide the authorization to issue debt. And so for us to raise that money, but we don't do that until those funds are on the horizon, right? So we have an amount that's authorized and yet unissued. And that's something that Amy and I keep a close eye on to make sure that we're thinking about that in terms of debt service payments in future years. At the end of last year, that was about $36 million. So it's a little snapshot of my office.
Can I just add?
Yes, please do.
Just one thing that I think is really important to mention is my office and my staff is separate from Joanna's,
Yes.
but there's a system of checks and balances between the two. So my office will process the vendor checks, but we're not authorized to mail them, and I don't sign them. They go down to Joanna, they check everything, and then she's responsible for, and her staff for mailing them out. Same with payroll. They process payroll. It comes up to us, and there's a check and balance between everything we do. And all of our payments that are issued from the town, whether it's payroll or vendor payments or debt payments, is signed off by myself as well as the town administrator. So there's a lot of checks and balances built into our procedures.
Yeah, I would say that also, just to add on to that, both Amy and I have prior experience in the private sector, right? And I think we bring and we leverage that into this world a bit in that, and certainly over the last couple of years, we've enhanced some controls and some checks and balances between our departments and even within the departments. We're tight on resources and short on staff, but we try to implement as many controls as we can in the process. All right, Tom, you're up. Yes, sorry.
Get a little more slack.
Come on in.
Get into the
Yeah.
fun here. Good evening, everybody. My name's Tom Caldwell, and I'm the chair of the Warrant Committee. What is the Warrant Committee? It's something often you often hear the Warrant Committee mentioned, but I think that there are even a lot of long-term residents of the town who don't actually know what the Warrant Committee does. So the Warrant Committee is a 15-member committee that's appointed by our town moderator. And the members of those committee are not obviously are not elected, they're appointed. Some are town meeting members, some are not. I would say that in the Warrant Committee as currently assembled, there are several people who've never been involved in really any aspect of town government up to this point in joining the Warrant Committee. So we're 15, as I said, we're 15 members, and as the town administrator indicated, we review the warrant. And the warrant is obviously, and I brought a copy of an old warrant. I have a bunch of these in the back of my car. So this is our warrant, and this is the 2024 annual town meeting warrant. And this is about 75 or so pages, and this lays out the warning to the town of what budgetary articles and other matters of interest that town meeting is going to be asking to consider. And the vast majority of these, obviously, as the three to my left have indicated, are really budgetary in nature. But what's unique about the Warrant Committee, if you look at other municipalities, is other towns have finance committees, very similar, usually appointed, and they review solely budgetary articles for another town's town meeting. The Warrant Committee is unique in Milton. There's a handful of other towns that have a Warrant Committee. And a Warrant Committee not only looks at the budgetary items, but they review all matters of interest to the town. So not just the budget, planning articles, sales of property, changes in bylaws. So there's really a host of things that we are sent as articles, and those articles are sponsored by the select board, various boards and committees throughout the town, citizens and others that bring forward these various articles that they want town meeting to consider, whether it be borrowing money or maybe a bylaw change, as I mentioned, something like that. And what we do is we get together as a committee, and as a town administrator indicated, we'll have the sponsors of the article, the various departments or committees that the article may impact or have an interest in, and have them, they come down, they explain it to us over the course of a night or several nights. And then we deliberate as a body. And at the end of the deliberation, depending on the article, we render a decision, we vote whether we approve or we don't approve of the article, and then we write a comment. And that comment is contained within the warrant, and it is underneath, and we make a recommendation to town meeting. We are town meeting's advisory body. So really what we are is 15 citizens. We just get these articles, we sit around a table over the course of several nights and we hash it out. Do we like it? What don't we like about it? Can it be improved? So, that's really what we do. And it's a very interesting, I've been on the Warrant Committee now for 3 years. I find it to be really interesting. It's fantastic. The Warrant Committee is currently assembled, represents almost every precinct in the town, various political parties, and I said those who are extremely interested in town politics and others who are just interested in numbers. So that's really what the Warrant Committee does. I appear, we sit at the front of town meeting, a long table, And frequently, oftentimes, I'm asked to stand up and comment on the article and suggest to town meeting what we think they should do. And of course, nothing we do is binding on town meeting. Like I said, we just sit down and we discuss the matter. Some people bring a lot to the table. Some people do their own research. And again, like I said, sometimes we rely on the other towns and those with specialized knowledge to kind of inform us and guide us in formulating our opinion for the town. We also have another option with an article. You don't see it frequently, but sometimes we say, this is a great article, but we send it back. And we don't say yes, we don't say no, but we think that, there's something good here. Sometimes we see that in planning articles. There's a good baseline here, but we ask the committee or board take it back, maybe do a little more work on it. Town meeting has some opinions. People come up and they speak to them. Maybe we have an opinion or some suggestions. And that board or committee may take it back and work on it, refine it a little bit, and then come back at a future town meeting and re-present. So like I said, the warrant committee I think, I've had a great time there. I think it's a great process. And it's really the citizens who are not elected who get to have a little bit of say in what town meeting has to consider. So that's a little bit about the warrant committee. I'd be happy to take any questions. Another thing I'd like to mention, especially the newer people in town, if you really want to get into the weeds, like these three people do, we have a town report. And this is a big book that we get every year. And if it goes through everything the town's done at the town meeting, the budget numbers, all the boards and committees, who's on what committee, who's on what board, who's your town meeting member. So this is something if you can get your hands on. Nick, I don't know if this goes to every resident of the town still. It does
Not anymore.
But they have these at the library. I know they have some up at town hall, and you can take a look at it.
It's online too.
It's online too.
Yeah, it's
Thank
on the
you very much.
webpage, yeah.
And just take a look through it, and you can really kind of see what's who's who in Milton town government. So.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And we're happy to take questions if there are any. I'll turn it over to you, Meg.
Sure. Do you have any?
Nothing yet.
Okay, well, first off, that was amazing. Thank you so much. I feel like my head is just like processing all this information, so thank you for enlightening us. We had index cards that were available when folks walked in to if they had questions to offer up. And we had a few sent into us ahead of time.
Nothing online.
Nothing on our Zoom land, okay. We had a couple of questions that people sent to us ahead of
Okay.
time, that I'll just read and
Sure.
folks who couldn't be here, but there's a question about the AAA bond rating. What does this mean? So Milton has a AAA bond rating, what does this mean? And how is our bond rating impacted by the town's budget and the outcome of potential override? Somebody say with the mic closer to it. Like this? Do I need to read it again?
Yes.
Okay. For the folks viewing at home. Milton has a AAA bond rating. What does this mean? And how is our bond rating impacted by the town's budget and the outcome of the override?
Sure. So I'll just pull a slide back up because I have one about the bond rating in my appendix here that sometimes I use, sometimes I don't. So this just pulls a couple of quotes out of our most recent ratings report. So we are a AAA community, rated by S&P as AAA, which is the highest a community can be. What that means in the financial markets, and Joanna could speak more to it, is that in theory, as we go out to borrow money, we should secure more favorable interest rates because of the creditworthiness of Milton as perceived by the markets and affirmed by S&P. So a couple of highlights from that report: our creditworthiness is supported by our affluent residential economy, cautious budgeting practice, and which leads to balance of positive operations and maintenance of strong reserves. So read into that, having good free cash, having good reserves, budgeting conservatively are attributes that they're looking for. They flagged budget uncertainty in terms of our labor contracts. All of the collective bargaining agreements in Milton both in the town department and all the school departments. Those all come up June 30, 2025. The school ones, I think, are on an August cycle, but essentially they're all expiring this calendar year and need to be renegotiated. So in terms of our employee salary costs, it's a little bit of an unknown because those contracts aren't settled. Our tax levy is all the way up to the top, so that does limit our ability to increase property tax in future years. This ratings report, which was issued in August, said management is considering asking voters to approve an override for fiscal 26, depending on expected expenditure growth. So the next sentence, we anticipate that Milton's management will make budgetary adjustments as necessary to maintain balanced operations. So that's saying that if there isn't an override, they expect us to cut budgets to accommodate for lower, to keep that budget balanced. But they note that if our performance is deteriorating, that we could lose our rating if our reserves aren't maintained, if we're decreasing services. So the other thing I'll just note, and it's not in this quote, is that typically the ratings report references that the town has a history of approving overrides, and that's looked at as positive because it points to, the taxpayers interested in preserving services, increasing and maintaining their taxes to maintain budgets and maintain the town's financial footing. So that's a big picture. Some quotes from the ratings report. I don't know if there's anything else I should add or missed.
Is that online?
It is online. It's on the accountant's webpage, the accounting department's webpage. Our last two. I think that's where I put it.
I think it is.
And the last two reports are on there. And we typically get rated every year because we're typically issuing debt every year. So we would expect to see another ratings report in August, September timeframe of 2025.
Can I just add one thing? Do you mind?
Yes, I'll just also add that in prior years, in the mid 2010s, when interest rates were so low, everybody was getting favorable rates. When the interest rate market gets more competitive, having that AAA rating really starts to make a difference.
And so I echo everything that Nick said, and I'll say, and we work with a financial advisor, quite a common financial advisor that that municipalities in the Commonwealth use, UFASI, and UFASI sends us a comparable, updated, report on a monthly basis about all issuances they see. So Nick, Amy, myself will look at that with frequency to make sure that we're understanding where the market's sitting right now for like communities and communities that are perhaps, at a lower rating too. That's something that I'm certainly peeking at. And I will say, so I think 2 years now of sitting in on these ratings calls. It's quite interesting to me because I was thinking it might be pretty like scratch the surface type stuff, but they dig in. I recall feeling like when we got off the last call, I'm like, have they just watched all of the public meetings on the town website in the last 2 months? Because they were bringing up topics that were being discussed in lots of different forums. So they really do, this is not a superfluous thing. This is something that I feel like they got a good quality indicator of the town in both of those instances. And like Nick said, I think that with volatile markets, we want to be making sure that we're going to borrow debt at the right rates that are going to minimize our debt service payments moving forward for important things in our town.
Karen.
Yes, you may.
And this is when the warrant committee gets to comment. So this is really how it works out. Everyone does the work in town government, the treasurer, the town administrator, and then this, say, in a vacuum, we're talking, the AAA bond rating comes to us. The warrant committee loves the AAA bond rating for all the reasons indicated by the treasurer, finance director, and the town administrator. So that's kind of how it would go. And of course, maybe we would dig into the numbers a little bit. We would talk about the work that they're doing and write it down and just share all that information with the town. Share what the great work that our town officers, treasurer, town administrator, and finance director are doing, obviously to maintain our AAA bond rating. So that's really kind of how it would work from the warrant committee's perspective.
Thank you guys.
Thank you.
Do we have any other questions online or anyone here? Liz? Can you project your voice?
Yes, but the people on Zoom.
Okay.
Hi. I had kind of two, this is weird. I had two questions. One of which was, Nick, you had mentioned sort of some of the volatility in the federal government and how much money we might be seeing sort of in the future. So can you, and I know the tariff conversation has gone back and forth, but can you tell us sort of how you're budgeting with that in mind for next year? And that was my first question. And then the second question escapes me, so I'll think of it.
Sounds good.
Thank you.
No problem. Thank you. So we haven't really dialed anything back or refrained from any anticipated spending due to uncertainty in the federal funding perspective. I think we're all in a bit of a waiting game because the town's departments don't really get operating support from federal funds. We get the one grant that we have right now is the Drug Free Communities grant that supports the work of the Substance Use Coalition. So that is an ongoing, it's a 5-year grant that was just awarded for another 5 years. So like that's the primary grant on the town departmental side that is funding activities that are more or less part of our operating budget. The school department, it's a different story where federal funds play a much bigger role. So we're kind of in a wait and see. We're proceeding as is. The federal government also provides substantial support to the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. So how that affects state aid for this budget cycle and future budget cycles to be determined. So 2 points in terms, for state aid, we're using the governor's budget. So the governor announced her budget in January, obviously before some of these changes, but we're using her revenue assessments and her state aid and state assessment numbers that they include in that budget. The House of Representatives will issue their budget this month. So we'll see where that lands and if adjustments need to be made. It's late in the game, but it gives us an opportunity to do that before town meeting. More broadly, in terms of economic impacts around kind of the economic uncertainty we've all seen in the past couple of weeks, we haven't, in terms of our local receipts, which are the more income or economic dependent, those are level budgeted from fiscal 25. So we're not expecting interest income to shoot way up. We're not expecting our motor vehicle excise tax to shoot way up. If people stop buying new cars, if our interest rates are worse, although rates are going up, so maybe it's hard, nobody really knows, but like we have kept that forecast level for fiscal 26. I felt it was conservative at the time. I think it's still conservative in a way, but as things change, we'll see. If that building cycle slows down, that could affect both new growth and our income in terms of building permits. But for right now, we haven't adjusted anything. We're all watching markets cautiously together, trying not to click onto 401ks and everything else, I'm sure. But for right now, more uncertainty, but nothing concrete quite yet. I don't have anything else to add. Yep.
So one area where we have been really conservative is the investment income, because we have over the last couple of years collected or had investment income much higher than our projections. And knowing that the interest rates might not stay where they are, we've budgeted probably about half of where we collected last year, just to make sure that we're not too overly optimistic in that area. And then secondly, as far as federal awards go, there is on the accounting department webpage the schedule of expenditures of federal awards, and that you could get a snapshot there. It's a report issued by our external auditors, which shows the different federal awards and the amounts that we've received.
Just so one other thing to add on to it is where we do benefit from federal funding and state funding, depending on certain issues, is on more like capital projects or projects that we wouldn't be able to fund within our budget otherwise. We have a pump station on Granite Ave, right close to the water, not ideal for climate change. So we had been awarded a grant to design improvements and changes to that to make it more resilient in case, floodplain rises or the sea level rise. That is a grant that is potentially going to be pulled out from under us. But it's a capital investment. It's not funding staff right now, but it would be a cost that we would have to take on ourselves rather than have be funded by an outside agency. The federal government also provides lots of money to the state that they turn around and give out in grants. Right now, we're not as eligible for grants due to our non-compliance with MBTA community. So our access to those grants right now is limited, more so than it would be in a normal cycle. But where we could see some impacts is if our capital projects that we chase through grants, where there's less opportunity for that from the state because federal funding is a place we likely would see some change.
Well, folks, thank you very much for the presentation. I'm going to try to consolidate my questions because there's a lot of information to consume. So, Joanna, you mentioned with the AAA bond rating that we get the best rates for the operation of the town. In the event of a no override, where it could potentially negatively impact our bond rating, what does that mean for the operation of the town? That's the first question for you. And for Nick, what are the steps to work positively to get back up to a AAA bond rating? And what is it that we need to do and expect as a town moving forward?
Thanks.
So that's a good question. I'll be honest, I don't know the exact answer to that, right? But I can suspect that if the town does not pass an override, the next time we have a ratings call, we'll have a conversation with them about that. That could influence the rating that we have previously received at a AAA level, and we could be downgraded as a result of that. The downgrade would mean that the issuance that we are having the ratings call about, so let's say that that's the next capital project on the horizon. It could be, what is the next capital project on the horizon?
The biggest one is the fire station.
Fire station, right. Okay, so, and that would be the fire station in East Milton Square.
And the bond issuance
For
for headquarters, because right now that's short-term notes. Short-term notes right now will be issuing a long-term bond in the future.
So presumably, when we issue those bonds at a something lower than AAA rating, we would go to market with that, and the bids that would come in from purchasers would indicate that we would be paying more in interest over the life of the bond. So what that means is that's more money the town will spend on those debt service payments. And I guess that's the easiest way that I can answer that and the simplest way that I can answer that. But I think that to the extent we can, and my feeling is that these calls are receptive dialogues, right? So to the extent that the ratings agency has an understanding of what the town's capacity is for operational overrides, or for thinking about that and the history of that, would all factor into their decision making. But I can't predict what that would look like, but I definitely know in many places in that, not many, several places in that most recent report that they reference our history with operational overrides and the town's willingness to fund for services for the community.
In terms of getting it, if we were to be downgraded, I don't know how quickly we would be pushed back up, but they would be looking then more at the, back end of the town's finances. Did our reserves go down? Has our fund balance declined? Has services been impacted that make Milton a less attractive community, that impact its demographics? That might mean that some of the more basic fundamentals that they view as attributes to Milton become less positive. But I think there's a pathway to make an argument that our reserves are minimally affected. But there are significant impacts to that. And in terms of getting back, I worked in Marlborough for 4 years. We were AA+ the entire time I was there, for the years before that, and we brought S&P out to Marlborough. We did a bus tour to show them all our office parks and all the labs that we had to just try to get over the hump on that to a AAA community. We couldn't do it. They did it the year after I was there, of course, but that just goes to show sometimes to get back can take a lot of effort, and all the wooing that we did, and the $30 million in excess levy capacity that Marlborough has, the $12 million in new growth that they had, and barely 2.5% increase on property tax. They didn't want to see that. It didn't work for them. But it just goes to show the effort that we put in, and we couldn't get over the hump. So it would take a good amount of work to get there.
Thank you. I think there was one more question, and then we should fire out 2 more questions.
Thank you for doing this.
Sure.
And I don't know if anyone here can answer this, but I'm just curious, how is a property taxed when it is in process of being built? So for example, the Ice House, those are individual condos that are gonna be assessed, but the time that basically a permit was issued to be built until they were actually built, what is the tax on that?
Sure. Thank you. Charlie O'Shea and Curtis Ross work in the assessor's office along with Barbara Johnson, and they're responsible for chasing building permits and capturing that growth. So on a kind of a day-to-day level, they get building permit information, so they'll make sure that projects, when they're completed, that they're able to go out. They'll try to visit properties, don't always get in, but then they're able to make upgrades and additions based on the building permit information. They look at Realtor.com, so if they see a house coming on the market that looks totally new, and they look in their database and it looks like they had below average finishes and now it's a brand new kitchen, they're able to catch growth in that way. For the bigger projects, and even like when they're building out a subdivision or a brand new construction single family home, they are able to assess growth on a percentage base. So we capture all growth from July 1 to June 30th of the prior year for our current year. So a little confusing, but so July 1 to June 30th of 24 informs our new growth for fiscal 25, our current year. In terms of the Ice House specifically, I don't believe that has contributed to our new growth yet, but now, as of June 30th, 2025, there could be units that are sold by then. So now we're gonna be close to 100%, if not at 100% for that entire building, in which case that's gonna be a significant increase of a couple $100,000 of new growth right then and there. And that'll be the same case for whether it's 711 Randolph Ave, that's the 40B next to DPW. The East Milton 40B has demo permits, not a building permit yet. So depending on what activity they get done between now and June 30th, there might be some incremental increase, but we try to capture it as it's being built. And then certainly once the certificate of occupancy start going out, they flip to 100%. Like Walcott Woods up off Canton Ave, it was built out over a number of years. Units were being sold while they're still building others. So that was several years of that contributing significantly to our new growth.
Good evening. Thanks all for that presentation. It was pretty detailed. Nick, can you go back to the bond ratings?
Sure.
I think that I have a question, but I want to set the context. So I think one of the things that we're all facing in the immediate future is that we're being asked to vote on an override. And I think we understand a little bit about why we're being asked to do that. But there are a number of things about this particular override that are unique and different. First thing that's different is that I did a little research. If approved, this override would be the 5th largest override ever approved in the state in the history of Proposition 2.5. So Proposition 2.5 has been in effect for 40 years. This would be the 5th largest override approved across the state. The second thing that's different is that in previous overrides, when we were asked to approve an override, and I want to be clear, I'm advocating for approval. I'm going to get to that in a minute, but it may not sound like it right now. The second thing that's different is that with previous overrides, we have been asked to approve an override that would improve the services that the town could offer. So we said, if you don't approve this override, it's going to be level service. If you do approve this override, here's what you get in addition from schools, from police, from fire, from DPW. That's different because this override is being asked to fund, in part, a deficit. We've never been asked to do that before. So that's a problem. And if you read some of the information from, is it Moody's or S&P?
S&P.
S&P. They say one of the things that underscores our creditworthiness is cautious budgeting practices. In the second paragraph, they say, we anticipate that Milton's management, that's all of these people plus the school committee, will make budgetary adjustments as necessary to maintain balanced operations. So the problem is that we're being asked to approve an override to fund a deficit. That's a significant problem. So the question is, here's the question. What are we doing to ensure that we will not be facing this same problem in a year or 2 or 3? If the strategy is to ask taxpayers to approve an override every 2, 3, or 4 years, that's not a strategy. And by the way, this override funds the school committee deficit or the school budget deficit, but it doesn't fund the additional growth. So the school department budget was previously growing at a rate of about 5 to 6% a year. That's a problem if the town's budget is growing at a rate of roughly 2.5%, or the tax revenue is growing at roughly 2.5%. So that's a problem. Now it's growing at a rate of 10%. And I haven't heard a plan, should be from the school committee, but now it falls to all of you, Nick, and the select board as well. How are we going to control the spending, and how are we going to make sure we don't have deficits next year and the year after that? We can't sustain 10% increases to a budget that is roughly 45%, 50% of the town budget. It's not sustainable. So I'm advocating for approval, but we need a plan. We need a plan to make the necessary adjustments and to manage the budget differently and more confidently going forward.
The team is.
I got it, yeah.
The team is, what's the plan?
Thank you. Appreciate the comments. I think there's a couple of pieces. First is in terms of one thing that is also unique about this override is there is built into the override a request for $700,000 that would be recurring, that is not earmarked, is not spent on anything in fiscal 26. So the ballot question for the override asks $8.8 million for town and school operating budgets and $700,000 for an operating budget stabilization fund. And the strategy behind that is with the limitations under Prop 2.5 and new growth and our other revenue sources is that even if we have departments coming in close to 3.5%, that might be outpacing our revenues. So what can we do to secure some additional funding? And that is by first asking voters to raise their taxes by an increment of $700, or what we can levy by $700,000, to put that away in an operating budget stabilization fund to be used in future fiscal years to help support operations. The other thing is, as we mentioned, there's $4.5 million in certified free cash that has not yet been appropriated. So another piece of what our recommendation is that $2 million of that free cash that's been certified will be put into the stabilization fund as well. So that's additional funding resources that makes our options greater. But I think, Mr. Walker, your comments more about how are we controlling the spending side of the house than just making more money available to be spent. So I think that's where we've had very frank conversations already with the school committee at a finance committee meeting about if this is approved, we're looking at minimal budgets from here on for the foreseeable future. The school budget went up 9% last year. Town budget went up closer to 4%, but 4% also outpaces what we can really tolerate. So it's a matter of understanding that our revenues are limited for the foreseeable future. This operating budget stabilization fund, while it would be available for fiscal year 2027, if we use some or most of it in 27, it's not going to be there in 28, 29, or 30. So we have to be very deliberate about what items that we're pulling from. So that message has been delivered. We're hopeful that as we work through the budget process, as we establish the revenue forecast early in the year, that we're able to say a hard line as to what is just available. There is no option for an override next year. If an override is approved for fiscal 26, we're not coming back in 27. So those numbers are severely limited. So there will be some tough conversations about what our priorities are and what resources we're able to use to push towards those. So I think those are just, two sides of that coin. We're setting aside some additional funding to be able to lean on when we need to. And on the flip side, we've been upfront with folks that we're looking at, a 2.5% budget year from here on for the next foreseeable years because of this. And the other item I just did want to mention on the town meeting warrant is, and also establish a special education reserve fund. Our intention was to fund that with another contribution of free cash to help the schools when there are extraordinary special education costs. We're not able to do that because of how we're using some of the free cash for fiscal 25's school budget, but this would be established if town meeting does so. If the schools feel their budget is in good enough position during next fiscal year or a subsequent fiscal year, if they have additional money in their school budget, they could put it in the Special Education Reserve Fund to be used in future years, rather than put in another fund or have it close out to the town's free cash. So this is a tool that we're putting that, again, would be another source of funding if there are monies available, or if there's free cash in future years that we could put towards this to help through years where there are unexpected increases. But we hear your comments. I think the other thing I just wanted to say, when we presented the concept behind the operating budget stabilization fund and talked about it in detail at the select board, we were clear that while this strategy gives us additional tools to manage costs over the next several years, it's all predicated on the idea that these budget asks in 27 and beyond will be low and minimal to get by. So if that's not the case and resources are expended, then we're going to be in a tough position, just as we are now. And I think that was really kind of, I don't know if there's anything else to add to that.
Do you mind if I say them?
Sure.
I would just say that I think that your point is a good one, Mr. Walker. I think uniquely this is funding. This override ask is to fund a level service budget. But at the same time, there's an element of these stabilization funds and these rainy day funds, you could call them that, but that will be funded with that override passage as well, right? So while it's not funding additional, the ask of the town would not fund additional needs-based budgeting from various departments, I do think that my interpretation of it would be that in addition to funding, you know, in order to cover the expenses that have been budgeted, so effectively what would be a deficit, there is the establishment of these monies into these stabilization accounts that will provide benefit in fiscal year 26 and beyond, with hope. Right? Ralph's got one right there.
Yeah, I just want to ask a quick follow-up question about the frequency of overrides, right? So I know the hope is not to have one if this does pass, to not have another one anytime soon, but in the landscape of municipal government and funding, how often, you know, does an override need to happen? Like how common and how frequently?
Yeah, I shared Milton's history. So 2007, 2010, and then a long gap to 2018, and then a long gap again now to 2026. I was looking at this and I found that this cycle of 2010-ish, 2018-ish, and now is kind of, we're not unique in that front, in that sense that it's like communities have had between 3 and 4 since about 2010. So it's not something we plan to have, but I think just by our limitations, it's certainly a factor in terms of it's something that we have to keep front of mind that these will likely be, we don't want to call them routine every 3 years, but I think on a cycle such as this, every 5 to 7 years, unless other things come up, because, you know, throughout the 2010s, there was strong economic growth that whole time. And then in 2020, 2021, we would have been in a position of potentially needing an override, but we had significant inflows of federal funding through the CARES Act initially in the wake of COVID, the American Rescue Plan Act, and then federal funding through the schools, through ESSER funding, which is a federal program. So there was a lot of money coming in, which is part of the reason why cities and towns have been able to kind of get through this time period without a lot of pressure financially. But it's leaving us all in a similar position around now. So I think I would say it's not something that we should plan to see every 3 to 5 years, but I think beyond that, you have to think about the limitations on our revenue. But there are other policy decisions a town can take to say, what other resources do we have to diversify our tax base, to seek other opportunities for revenue growth that might contribute to that and move around some of that time frame.
Thank you again. So fiscal responsibility has been a term that's been used, you know, in the past, say, month and a half. And what I appreciate about this panel here is that there seems to be 4 levels of fiscal responsibility, checks and balances, and watching over each other's departments and not signing checks. And so my question to you, Nick, is for the residents and the voters of this town, what steps is the school committee taking to watch their budget? Is there a third party that's going to oversee how they manage their budget so that we don't find ourselves in the situation again? It seems that the school committee and the school department is running their budget, and it seems that, you know, the 4 of your departments are assisting. But what about their specific oversight so that we don't find each other or our town in a situation like this in the future?
Sure, thanks. I think there's a couple of changes that I think we've already seen in terms of the way that they handle the budget, talk about the budget, share transparent news about their budget. We fully expect that will continue. We've talked at the select board level about tweaking our approach in terms of financial committee structure of instituting a new committee where select board, school committee, and warrant committee will all be representative to meet on a regular basis to review both town and school budgets from a budget development perspective, but also a budget monitoring, a budget oversight perspective. So that's something I expect that the select board will look to institute as we come out of this budget year and enter the new one. We've talked about ways to have all of our practices reviewed and analyzed to make sure that in terms of both town and schools, what are we doing in terms of our financial practices, our HR practices and policies and procedures, are the things that we can do better? And if so, what are they? Are the things that we need to invest in to better manage some of our processes. So that work is, we expect to hopefully will be able to get somebody on board to do that. But I would just credit in terms of the school leadership and the finance subcommittee, particularly the schools, in terms of the way they've been, since in the last, several months now, increasing and ever more transparent in terms of the conversations, in terms of the nuts and bolts of things that they've, issues that they've run into, how they've talked about and worked through solutions. And we expect and look forward to continuing that into the new fiscal year. I don't know if there's anything else to add to that piece.
Maybe just Katie.
And then there is a new assistant superintendent for finance and operations, I think is the title, who has come in with a new set of eyes in terms of how to look at their management, institute new practices, procedures, reinforce some best practices. So we see that work undergoing and anticipate it'll continue.
Sure. I think we're gonna wrap this puppy up and send everyone home to bed. It's late, and we've appreciated all of you taking so much of your time tonight, and everyone who came out tonight and who's listening at home. Thank you. We've got a lot going on in our town right now, and a lot of people working really hard to kind of figure this out and launch us forward in a good way. So thank you. Have a good night, and to be continued.
Thank you.
3, 2, 1. Here we go!